Picture this. You're sitting down to write your weekly newsletter and you got nothing. You got nothing. You don't know what you're going to write about, and yet your newsletter is supposed to go out in a few hours. What do? A lot of people don't publish their newsletters, and we can get trapped in not publishing. But I have published my newsletter to my list every single week for going on 3 years now. Haven't missed a week. How do I do it? I don't start from a cold page. So in this video, we're going to talk about the systems and structures I use to make sure my newsletter goes out every single week, well researched, well thought out, and well received by my list. Let's dive in. The secret to me getting my newsletters out every single week, it's that I don't sit down to write from a cold page. I have systems and structures in my business that allow me to be creative. In this video, we're going to talk about the 4 systems I have put in place in order to get my newsletter out on time. System 1, having a methodology, a premise, and a point of view. So I'm not just sitting there thinking, what do I want to talk about today? I have an idea that I'm exploring in my newsletters. For me, the idea I'm currently exploring is how do we stop gambling on tactics and how do we start building stronger businesses through business systems and business foundations. So I have a framework that I am exploring, which is how do we design businesses? How do we build businesses that run and compound and build systems? How do we run those said systems? So I have something that I'm exploring. I have a premise that I'm exploring. I'm not just trying to sell you something. I'm not just sending you an email that's random. I'm really thinking about using this topic to be an explorer. And I'm also always answering questions from my clients. I'm always thinking, this didn't make sense to my clients, or this is the question they have, or this is the challenge they have. Or a lot of times I get annoyed by something that shows up in my own inbox that I think violates some of the philosophy that I'm discovering as I'm developing my point of view. So I'm always exploring a topic. I'm not just trying to sell something. So this is a great way to start thinking about what are the topics you talk about? What is your framework? What is your approach? What are you investigating, like an explorer that you want to write about for your clients? So that is number 1, is having a reason to write your newsletter that's not about selling something, that's about exploring an idea, a premise, thinking about how it all hangs together so you always have a topic to talk about. Number 2, I'm always collecting 5 to 10 ideas and I'm storing them in one location. So I store all of my newsletter ideas in a Notion database. I don't care where you store them. I do care that it's somewhere where you can access, somewhere where anytime you have an idea or a thought or a resource or something that triggers your brain, you write it down. If I'm on a walk and I have an idea that comes to my mind, I maybe take a voice memo and I put it in the Notion database. If a client says something or I hear an interesting snippet on a podcast, I immediately go to Notion and I put it in my Notion database. And then when I'm thinking about the idea I have, I immediately sometimes open up my Notion, take some bullet points, have a place to put those ideas. So then when I sit down to fully flesh out and write it, I'm never wondering what I want to talk about. There's always 5 to 10 things that I've been taking notes on during my week, capturing ideas, putting them in one place, having a place for them to go. And that way, when I sit down, I'm like, oh yeah, this one feels really resonant right now, or this is the most fleshed out. I'm capturing all of my ideas and organizing them so that when I'm like, this was a really great idea, it's in my Notion database. I know exactly where to look at it, and I'm collecting those thoughts and ideas. The third step in getting my newsletter sent out every week is I have a resource library of links I want to share. So every week I have a section in my newsletter which has community events and reads and podcasts that I'm listening to, really because I want to help be a curator of ideas. And so as I see an interesting podcast come through, I save it to my Notion database. If someone says, hey, will you promote this thing in my newsletter? I save it to my Notion database. Every week I'm sending those links as I go into one place. So when I sit down to populate that section on Saturday, I'm never having to search for links that time. I'm always collecting them. Sometimes I don't use them that week. Sometimes I do. I'm always collecting information, curating it, in one place. So when I sit down to write the newsletter, I have a list of choices I can choose from. Sometimes I repeat resources that are really helpful, but I'm never trying to collect the resources the day I write the newsletter. So that's another tip for me. The last step in making sure my newsletter goes out on time is having time blocked for my newsletter. So I know that after doing this for 3 years, it takes me roughly 2 to 2.5 hours to go from a list of bullet points to a published newsletter. So that includes writing the piece and editing the piece. That includes adding the links. I've saved some time by having those links all in Notion already. I have to add my YouTube thumbnail and promote any workshops that I'm doing. But that takes me 2 to 2.5 hours because I have a ConvertKit template. So that time usually is Saturday mornings. But if I know if I'm going to be out of the country or I'm going to be out of town or I have something to do on Saturday, I need to slide that block over. So it doesn't just disappear. That block needs to be moved to Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or sometime earlier in the week. If I know I'm really going to be out of town and unable to move that block, this is when I have guest newsletter posts that I solicit in advance. I did this when I was out of the country. It's great exposure for your friends as well to get exposure to your audience. I might repeat a newsletter edition I've done a year or two ago. Again, my list was smaller then, so not everyone's seen it, and it might just need some tweaks and updates. But I know that I'm going to need 1 hour if I'm repeating something or adding in a guest post, but 2 to 2.5 if I'm writing from scratch. That time lives on my calendar. That time block moves because I'm always preparing ahead. These are the 4 ways that I make sure my newsletter goes out on time. I'm always exploring a certain topic, part of my methodology. So I'm never at a loss of what ideas I want to talk about, what am I exploring, what angles I'm thinking about. 2, I'm maintaining a list of 5 to 10 topics, ideas, always collecting bullet points. So I'm never sitting down to write from a cold start. 3, I'm collecting all the links and the resources I'm going to need to include in my newsletter. I'm collecting those in a Notion database. So when I sit down to compile it all, I have everything I need. And the 4th is I am dedicating a specific time, sometimes even a specific place, to getting my newsletter out because I know how long it takes. If something's going to push me off track because of other commitments, I move the time or I pre-plan another option. So when you think about wanting to have a creative practice, how can you implement some of these ideas? Never really starting from a cold start, having a couple ideas, but more importantly, collecting everything you're going to need into one place at a set time. I'm curious if these practices would be supportive for you in making your creative practice happen. So let me know which of these practices you want to implement, and I'll talk to you soon.